With the NBA draft fast approaching, I wanted to talk about one of my biggest pet peeves when it comes to the actual NBA draft, and really the just draft lottery and the philosophy that some teams take, and I think should adapt going forward into the future of the lottery, at least for today's modern NBA. And what that philosophy to me is that I don't think traditional old school type centers should be used for lottery picks. Now, there's a few reasons I say this. One is because I just think the NBA is kind of moving away from that type of guy, and he gets a lot exploited more than he gets really promoted and really excels and makes your team better. And we see that with guys like Rudy Gobert, and Rudy Gobert is like the ideal old school center. Now, yes, he's a little skinnier than like the Shaqs of the world and stuff, but like back in the day, he would have been a great center to have because he's an excellent shot blocker, a great paint defender, and is just one of the best defenders to ever play in the NBA. But he can't guard the perimeter at all, and he can't score really by himself at all either, and he really kind of just becomes a detriment when it comes to playoff time, like we are currently seeing them right now in the playoffs as they're down 3-0 to the Dallas Mavericks. And now, yes, there's exceptions to the rule. Like, for example, last year, the Mavericks were kind of an exception to the rule because I think Derek Lively just really fit what they needed. Like, the Dallas Mavericks already had a great team, and they just needed supporting cast members, and Derek Lively just fit what they needed. So I think that was an exception because the team was already in a good spot. But for the most part, lottery teams are bad teams, so those teams need a lot more than just a complimentary piece like a Derek Lively or someone like that. And when you draft that type of guy, he really doesn't raise the ceiling of your team that much if the team isn't already established and good around them. And that is the biggest reason why I think traditional centers should not be drafted early in the lottery. And this is not, by the way, talking about like the new age centers or like the Wembanyamas, the Chets, the Alex Sars of the world. Those guys, I think, have their place and are probably really the future of the center position. I'm more talking about the old school, can't really shoot, doesn't have the most offensive skill, really athletic, can block shot and rebound type guys. Those are the guys I'm really focusing on here in this video. And kind of like the motivation for me making these videos, because if you follow the NFL at all, now I don't follow the NFL nearly as close as I follow the NBA, at least not as detailed, and I don't really I don't scout prospects and things like that in the NFL, but the NFL is a pretty commonly known rule that you shouldn't draft running back super high in the first round because there's so many of them and there's such a high supply of them, and there's really not that much of a demand, and you can find a very good running back at basically any point in the draft. Now, yes, once again, there's exceptions to this rule, and sometimes there's just an absurdly good running back that you cannot pass up if you're a certain team, and that is exactly what happens with guys like Saquon Barkley and just some of the best running backs ever to play. Those are exceptions to the rule. Obviously, like every rule has, they have their exceptions, and I think that is a very similar case to go with the traditional big man in the NBA because there is such a high supply of them. Look at guys that are just drafted later than the lottery or just undrafted in general. There's just so many guys who can block shot, rebound, and that are tall enough to really do that you really don't need to draft them high, and it's hard to make an argument for them unless they're just so absurdly good that you cannot pass up on them. And to really show what I'm talking about, we're going to start with the 2018 draft and go all the way up to last year's draft, and I'm going to show you the lottery bigs that were taken, or at least the lottery traditional bigs that were taken, and then the non-lottery and undrafted traditional bigs that were in those draft classes, and I'm going to compare the two after I go over all of them, and I'm going to really just show you how many there actually are and why it usually does not make sense to draft one of them early or at all in the lottery for that matter, unless, once again, you are an exception to the rule and you already have a good team around them and you just so happen to trade for a lottery pick early on and it was just a good trade. But that is like one of the only exceptions to this rule. Okay, so starting off with the 2018 draft, the lottery traditional bigs that were drafted were DeAndre Ayton at number 1 overall and Wendell Carter Jr. at 7th overall. Now, Wendell Carter Jr., you could argue, kind of not traditional in the realest sense, but when he came in, he was more of a traditional center, so I'm going to put him on the list. But then some of the non-lottery and even undrafted guys have names like Mo Wagner at 25, Robert Williams at 27, Mitchell Robinson at 36, and then undrafted you have Jock Landale, Drew Eubanks, and even Doo-Wop, who had a great year with Portland this year, and it just shows you how good that those guys still can be, even if they aren't late in the lottery, and there's just such a high supply of them, and I just think for sure in 2018, it would have been stupid to draft Ayton or Wendell in the lottery when it was such a stacked and talented draft class. And then even in 2019, 2019, really the only traditional big that was picked in the lottery was Jackson Hayes, number 8 overall to the New Orleans Pelicans, while the non-lottery of that team was Nick Claxton at 31 overall, Daniel Gafford at 38th overall, and then undrafted, you had Moses Brown and Naz Reid. Now, Naz Reid, you could definitely argue he's not a traditional center, even coming in, and I would 100% accept that. So if you don't want Naz Reid on this list, you can just go with Claxton, Gafford, and Moses Brown, which is still a very, very solid list for non-lottery selected bigs in that year. And then even in 2020, the lottery consisted of James Wiseman and Onyeka Okongwu, while the non-lottery was Isaiah Stewart, Nick Richards, and Paul Reed. And then kind of just moving on a little bit quicker, 2021, there were no traditional bigs selected in that draft class, and Isaiah Jackson was really the only traditional big that was selected outside of it at 22nd overall as well. And then in 2022, we had Jalen Duren picked 13th overall by the Detroit Pistons, and then the non-lottery ones were Mark Williams at number 15, Walker Kessler at 22, and then even Kenneth Lofton as an undrafted free agent. And then even in last year's class, the only traditional big that was picked was Derek Lively, while the non-lottery people consisted of Noah Clowney, Mohamed Gay, Tristan Vucevic, Trace Jackson Davis, and then even some undrafted free agent guys who have a chance to make it in the NBA one day in Tubulus and Oscar Tashwibi. Now, I'm sure a lot of you probably aren't familiar with many of those guys outside of Trace Jackson Davis and maybe Noah Clowney, but all of those guys have played very, very solidly this year. Gay showed lots of potential. Tristan Vucevic at the end of the year for Washington actually played very, very well for them as their starting center, and all those guys were picked fairly late. Noah Clowney 21, Gay 39, Vucevic at 42, and Trace Jackson Davis as literally the last pick in the entire class, and he made an all-rookie team. And then even those undrafted guys, Oscar Tashwibi was tearing up the G League with his rebounding numbers, so he will probably make the NBA sooner rather than later as well. So although some of those lottery bigs that were selected in those classes, I would definitely say are good players, that's not my argument. I'm not arguing that those players picked in the lottery for the most part are quote-unquote bad players or not valuable players, but I don't think they raise the ceiling as much as you would want a lottery pick to do, and with there being such a high supply of them and such a, not a low demand, but not as high demand as the supply is, there's really no reason to feel that you have to pick them at that lottery price unless you're in, like I said, the Dallas Mavericks situation where that is quite literally one of your only needs left on the roster, and I think that is literally the only exception to the rule, because as you can see, there's just so many of them that can do what even these lottery guys do, and there's really no huge gap between them, and even in a lot of cases, the non-lottery guys end up being better than a lot of the lottery guys. And to even drive the point on even farther, in my opinion, let's just look and grade the lottery class of bigs between the non-lottery draft of bigs, and let's just see what is better. So for the non-lottery actually being better in a draft class, I would say 2019 was better, 2022 was better, and 2023 has a chance of being better. Then even the lottery or non-lottery being equal to each other, I would say 2018 and 2020 are pretty equal, and the only class that you can really argue that the lottery was better than the non-lottery, I would say 2018, and that is just traditional centers. And I didn't include 2021 because I don't think that's fair, because they didn't have any selected in the lottery, so obviously I have nothing to compare it to, but I just think overall it seems to show that there's just so many players in the mold of a traditional center who can block shots, grab boards, and just do what you want a traditional center to do, and you can get them literally anywhere in the draft class at most times, and even in free agency they can be cheap in a few years. I just don't think it is really ever worth it to draft one in the lottery, once again, unless you're the exception to the rule like the Dallas Mavericks were last year. So although I will say the traditional big still isn't necessarily a bad thing to have on your team, nor are they bad players by any means, that's not my argument. The argument is just that they're not as valuable as a lottery pick should be, and there's a lot better ways to improve your team through the lottery than drafting a traditional big, especially if your team is bad, which most lottery teams are. So really, just to conclude this video, I just want to really hammer home, I'm not saying the players are bad players. Onyeka Okongwu is solid. Derek Lively is solid at what he does. But unless you're the exception to the rule, like the Mavericks or any other team that's good in the lottery, unless you're an exception to the rule where that is your only need and you already have a good team established with guards that are going to be able to make the correct passes for them, due to their lack of skill on the offensive end and how raw they usually are coming in on the offensive side of the ball, it is almost never worth it if you're a bad or terrible team to draft a traditional big, because they're not going to be able to create their own offense. The best you're going to get out of them is a Rudy Gobert, which, yes, is a great player, but can still have major flaws on the offensive end, like we are seeing him consistently have every time he gets in a big playoff series, because teams are able to play him off of the floor due to how untalented he is on the offensive end, despite him being one of the best defenders to ever come in the NBA in the paint. So there's just a lot of flaws that come with drafting traditional bigs in the lottery, and with there being so many of them, and with, I think, players and lottery level players being able to make bigger impacts than most traditional bigs will ever be able to, I just don't think it usually makes sense for that. But hey, that's just my opinion. On your thoughts in the comment section below. Do you agree with me? Do you think that you should draft traditional bigs? Do you think you shouldn't? On your thoughts in the comment section below. And I genuinely want to hear y'all's opinions on this, because this is something that I don't see a lot of people say, and I kind of feel in the minority on this opinion, despite I think there being a lot of evidence to back it up as well. So I really would like to hear all of your opinions in the comment section below. And to the point, hit the like button and the subscribe button. It mean the absolute word to me, and I hope you have a blessed day, because I had a blessed day, so you need to have a blessed day. All glory to God. See you in the next video. Goodbye. Boo. Blah.